Hold up, Niners fans. I got you. What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 9 team in my power rankings as we head into the start of the 2025 NFL season. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the San Francisco 49ers. And in this series, we have really highlighted the idea of those wild card indicators, showing critical variables with either a position group or an individual player to say, well, there's some questions here. There's upside with this, but there's downside as well. And ultimately, if things go right, this could be a big piece that leads to this team exceeding expectations, or vice versa. If things don't go well with that player or position group, this team might be due for some disappointment this season. Well, this 49ers team, the entire team is a wild card. This is the NFL's wild card. A truly unique team with a combination of aging veterans coming off of injuries, and frankly, for a top 10 team, a lot of young first and second year players that the Niners are counting on to step up as well. So we've got a lot to talk about here today. Very much looking forward to today's deep dive. This 49ers team might have the widest range of outcomes of any team in this series, so it should be a fun one. As we get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help me out. It tells other Niners fans and football diehards just like you to check out the video, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the remaining deep dives as we lead up to the number 1 team in my power rankings. But let's get started. In this series, we go chapter by chapter, going through each position group as well as the coaching staff, and begin by looking at their offseason changes with the question of, did they get better, worse, or did they stay the same at that spot? And we'll begin here with the coaching staff with the Niners. And this team is seeing significant changes with the coaching staff, especially on the defensive side of the ball there, where Brandon Staley gets hired as the defensive coordinator by the New Orleans Saints. I don't know if the Niners were going to move on from Brandon Staley or not, but if they were planning on keeping him, that is an absolute gift to Kyle Shanahan and 49ers fans. His departure is pure addition by subtraction. It's not a coincidence this defense was as bad as it was last year with him as the sort of assistant head coach. And then Nick Sorensen as well is now going to be the special teams coordinator in Dallas. He for sure, I know that the Niners fired and decided to move on from. But they didn't just clean house of liabilities like Brandon Staley and potentially Nick Sorensen, but they get lucky enough that Robert Saleh is just hanging out there to be hired as a defensive coordinator. This is really next in the long line of hires that we've seen of teams really trying to replicate that Kansas City Chiefs formula, where you get the failed head coach or a guy that is very unlikely to be a head coach again anytime soon, but a great defensive mind, someone that they're very familiar with in Robert Saleh, coming back here to San Francisco. So you upgrade just by saying goodbye to Brandon Staley, and then you bring in Robert Saleh, who I think very highly of. I look at this coaching staff as massively upgraded compared to last year, and possibly the biggest upgrade this entire team made is with that defensive coaching spot. And then as we turn our eyes to really breaking down this coaching staff, you will also see a new offensive coordinator showing up there, Clay Kubiak, who we can talk about here in a few minutes, but he has been promoted internally, where Chris Forrester is going to take a different title there. So not really an offseason change, but is at least something of note there changing with this staff. But at the top of all of this, we have Kyle Shanahan, of course. And I just got to say this out the gate, man. I don't know that there is a coach, a player, whatever, in the NFL with a wider discrepancy in terms of how his own team and the league views that person versus how the media and fans view that person. Not that I think most NFL fans think Kyle Shanahan is a bad coach, but the amount of talk I saw about is Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat in the middle of last season, whether it was on Twitter or on the big networks or even in like my own mailbag questions, a lot of chatter about if the Niners might move on from Kyle Shanahan. And I just think that's absolutely crazy. And a huge reason for that is Kyle is probably the most well-documented head coach, currently coaching in the league right now, just in terms of years and years of praise and podcasts and articles and, those little segments before primetime games, all just raving about Kyle, yet he has not gotten over that final hump to win a Super Bowl. And I think there is a little bit of Kyle Shanahan fatigue out there from a lot of NFL fans. So I think that's where that stems from. But if there was any other coach in the league that went to 3 straight conference championship games with the likes of Jimmy Garoppolo and a 7th round pick in Brock Purdy as his quarterback, and then had one mid-season that was entirely derailed by injuries, there is nobody that would even get entertained as a hot seat candidate in the league. It is just crazy to me to think that the Niners are even, that's even in the back of their mind right now, is firing Kyle Shanahan. And if they were crazy enough to fire him, you guys, this would be one of the most heated yet short-lived head coach hiring processes in NFL history. I cannot stress enough how highly the NFL perceives Kyle Shanahan as a head coach, as an offensive play designer, as a play caller, and I could not agree more. I have him ranked as my 3rd overall head coach, and it's reflected in the offensive coaching rankings that I give to all of these teams, where I have the Niners tied for 1st with 4 other teams for pass game coaching, and alone for run game coaching, dead set at 1st in the league. Now, if there is a valid criticism of Kyle Shanahan, I would say the kind of overall culture building and just other side of being a head coach in terms of, running the team as opposed to just his offense. I don't think Kyle's bad at it. I think he builds a tough competitive culture. I think players enjoy playing for him for the most part, but I wouldn't put him on the same level of like Andy Reid or Sean McVay or even some other coaches in the league, just from a sort of CEO, side of being the head coach. So that's where you see that overall coach and culture grade that I give these teams. The Niners rank 6th to 13th. That is sort of the benefit of the doubt slider that applies to each team. And I do think the Niners have still earned a lot of benefit of the doubt, just maybe not at the very top of the league at this point in time, after some of the, I'll just say, drama that has taken place with this Niners team over the last year plus. Even going back to last offseason, I don't think this team was really put together in a way that they were prepared to start this season. It's not all Kyle Shanahan's fault, but you can at least point to him a little bit there. And then you'll also notice he ranks as my 3rd overall head coach, whereas last year I did have him as the 1st ranking head coach in the league. It was already a tight race, but there's a couple coaches that will be coming in this series. You can probably guess who those names are, but I will keep it a secret for now. But still ranking 3rd there, I view Kyle as sort of a tier 1 elite head coach, probably the biggest asset that this Niners team has that helps them rank as a top 10 team here. And I just have to put this Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat stuff to bed. I will say, if let's say we do get a repeat of last year and the Niners miss the playoffs, the guy we might see on the hot seat is John Lynch. I like John Lynch, but the drafting resume really from like 2021 to 2023 has been really brutal for this team. It's not all bad. I don't know that I'm quite prepared to say that John Lynch is like the worst GM in the league, because when he hits and when this Niners team hits, it's finding a Fred Warner, the best linebacker in the league, in the 3rd round. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. Slam dunk trades like bringing in Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey. It clearly is not all bad, But so many of those misses with their draft picks has really led to a lack of depth on this team, and it has really hurt them in a season like last year where they got more and more injured. You really, really felt it, and I think if there's a hot seat guy, we don't have a ton of GM conversations in this series, but that is one worth having, that it's a big year for these young players to make an impact on this team for John Lynch's sake, because they're counting on a lot of those guys that we'll talk about in this video. But as we move forward here, like I mentioned, Clay Kubiak gets the promotion here. Good for Clay, very young coach that's been under Kyle Shanahan here. I actually can't find his official age anywhere. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But he is, I would assume, the younger brother of Clint Kubiak. I don't know how many brothers there are there. I would love for you guys who have that information to help us out in the comments down below. But obviously a part of the Kubiak family and coaching tree here. There is a chain of nepotism with the Shanahan-Kubiak family, but it's not like that hasn't led to results. We saw Clint here just a couple years ago where he then took a offensive coordinator job with the Saints, did a great job, and is going to be interdivision here with the Seattle Seahawks going against his brother Clay. So the Kubiak-Shanahan legacy lives on, and you can't even really make fun of it because it's basically all led to successes, whether it's Gary and Mike down to Kyle with Clay and Clint. All these guys are super respected offensive minds. It runs in the family, if you will. So fun to see another Kubiak climbing the ranks here. I would imagine if things go well, he's going to be on a lot of people's lists to be poached here from San Francisco if possible, but making him the offensive coordinator in this internal promotion where Chris Forrester was the listed OC last year. He's 63 years old. I don't think too many people are looking at Forrester to steal him, but Kubiak would have been a little bit easier by the NFL rules to steal if they left him as a, pass game specialist, which is what he was. Now listed as the offensive coordinator by rule, I believe Kyle has to wave the wand of approval to go take a job elsewhere as an offensive coordinator, or maybe someone just makes that leap of faith and looks at Clay Kubiak as a head coach candidate. That's also possible. Now, as far as the scheme on this offense is concerned, I'd be surprised if those watching this video aren't really familiar with what Shanahan and a Shanahan-style offense is at this point, but he runs his offense that is replicated all around the league. About 2/3 of the league runs some form of a Shanahan or McVay offense, which is going to be at the core an under center run game that marries the run and pass via play action to make their runs look like their passes, keep linebackers in a bind, and create those explosive plays and some easier looks for the quarterback where they can turn that head around and see guys screaming open on play action. That's the core of what this offense is all about. Now, Shanahan has evolved and put his own twists on this throughout the years. Typically, this is a very wide zone heavy run game. We see that around the league, and we saw that in the early days of Shanahan in San Francisco. He has leaned a lot more into some trap and counter runs, getting much more diverse with, especially like pulling guards, but running inside more often. That's been an evolution of the run game here for sure. And then whereas a lot of these other offenses around the league are either going to be 11 personnel teams where they focus on being a 3 wide receiver focused offense. You also see a lot of 12 personnel teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, for example, coming out with 2 tight ends a lot. The Niners do both of those things. They have Jawan Jennings to be that big bodied 3rd wide receiver for 11.5 personnel, if you will. They signed Luke Farrell to be a 12 personnel team as well with 2 tight ends on the field. But the Niners lean into as much 21 personnel as anybody in the league, featuring the use of that fullback in a traditional sense, that lead back, someone that can get lost in some of their play-action passing concepts as well. The Niners have very much made themselves unique, along with one of Kyle's proteges with the Miami Dolphins in Mike McDaniel's own twist on this Shanahan-style offense. But obviously a proven scheme that has led to plenty of results here in San Francisco and throughout essentially the entire league at this point. I think we are good now, though, to move to the defensive coaching here with Robert Saleh making his return. This is just such a breath of relief for Niners fans after really what they've been through the last 2 years. The Niners had just such a good thing going in the first 6 years of Shanahan's time as a head coach here. The first 4 with Robert Saleh and then DeMeco Ryans for 2 years after that. But after DeMeco left for the Texans job in 2023, they've been spiraling defensively. Steve Wilks and Shanahan butted heads in 2023, and that defense was pretty good, but not what they were used to. And then last year was really a bad season for this defense under Brandon Staley's leadership there. Surprise, surprise. But Saleh goes through the Jets circus and then lands back here in San Francisco. It really couldn't have played out any better for the Niners to be able to get him. And I think the writing was on the wall the second the Jets fired him. Saleh actually went to Green Bay to hang out with his best friend in Matt LaFleur for the year. But with Jeff Hafley having the success he had, who was a Saleh disciple, kind of a little bit of an awkward arrangement there where the student became the master, if you will. But obviously Saleh, still young, has aspirations to become a defensive coordinator and maybe even a head coach candidate again someday. But with that Niners job opening back up, it really just couldn't be more of a perfect hire. And you can get into some of the criticisms of Saleh, running that Jets team. I don't think he did a perfect job as a head coach. Some questions of him being maybe a little bit too player-friendly at times, and not always having the best vision for the organization in mind were relevant criticisms, but probably overstated because of the disaster that was the New York Jets. Generally speaking, he went into New York and got that defense absolutely humming. And then with big expectations for last season, they started slow. And really, Saleh got fired before he could even make any adjustments and fix the defense. So I still think very highly of him. As far as the coaching rankings, they get a B+ grade, ranking as high as 7th for pass defense coaching. I think the run game side of things is maybe a trail behind that if we're assessing Robert Saleh's defense. They get a B grade for run defense coaching, which ranks 14th to 22nd. But in a league flooded with very good defensive coordinators, a lot of guys like Robert Saleh, frankly, that were head coaches that weren't quite cut for that job, but then settle in as brilliant defensive minds. I think Saleh is already someone you should perceive in that category that can climb up even further, just kind of settling back in here in San Francisco as he gets reacclimated, which is something we see in this series. Anytime a coach changes hands, the ratings are going to come down just a little bit at first because it does take some time usually to get to know the roster, mesh with the players, make the right adjustments for your scheme. But even with that, already viewing him as roughly a top 10 defensive coordinator with those rankings. And, he gets a little bit of a benefit too that the captain of his defense in Fred Warner is someone he's already worked with. He's got a good starting point, certainly, with so many existing members of the staff and roster still in place here. So, this really is just one of my favorite overall hires, head coach or coordinator wise, in the entire NFL from this offseason, and it really should work out well. And then as far as Saleh's scheme is concerned, we've recently broken this scheme down. 2 of our recent deep dives were the Houston Texans and Green Bay Packers, where Saleh is really at the forefront of what those teams are doing schematically with that 4-2 front. We've talked a lot about the heavy focus on running twists and games up front, where all these defenses, they do like to win and rush with just 4 while keeping all of their guys in coverage on the back end, but really leaning into those twists and games up front to still cause confusion, cause blocking mishaps, and create kind of leverage advantages for their defensive linemen. That also is an effective way to help the run game because with some of these pass rushing stunts, they actually can double as run defense stunts where you're causing confusion for offensive linemen, where guys are slanting in directions you're not familiar with. The idea of kind of making it feel like you're running into a hurricane can lead to some very good run defense opportunities, not just for penetrating defensive linemen, but, opening up some windows for aggressive linebackers to headhunt and make plays around the line of scrimmage as well. And then from a coverage perspective on the back end, it's a lot of those modern split safety, quarters focused, cover four oriented coverages on the back end with those split safety concepts. We're going to show pre-snap two-shell coverages that can rotate into anything, whether it is quarters, where they presumably will run a good bit of that here, if what they did in New York with Saleh is any indication, but also cover 6, cover 2, rotating into cover 3, being flexible enough to play cover 1 with one of those safeties maybe buzzing down from a pre-snap two-shell structure, a pretty diverse coverage structure, and then blitzing when appropriate and being creative with their blitzes to at least keep you honest with the blitz and using it as a changeup, if you will. But it is a very good defensive system and one of my favorites to watch in the league that has led to really proven results everywhere it's been. Worked here with the Niners. It's worked for the Texans. It mostly worked for the Jets before everything, ran off the tracks last year, and it worked for the Packers last year under Halfley. So to conclude, the Niners are in very, very good hands with their overall coaching, top 3 offensively and roughly top 10 defensively. And that's definitely a big contributor towards why the Niners find themselves still inside the top 10 of these power rankings, despite a middling finish last season. But it's certainly not the only reason. There is still a lot to like and get excited about with this Niners roster, and certainly a lot of players to talk about here that bring some question marks to the table. But before we do dive into this roster, I got to thank the sponsor for today's video, SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the #1 ticketing app out there, the best user interface. If you understand the basic coloring system of this deep dive series, well, you'll definitely understand how it works on SeatGeek. Green means good, red means bad. Look for those green dots, and you will guarantee you are getting the most bang for your buck, not just on the SeatGeek app, but market competitive prices as well. I'm consistently looking at other apps, always find myself back at SeatGeek to get my tickets, whether I'm going to a baseball game, NFL Sunday, a concert, you name it. SeatGeek has got you covered. Niners fans watching this, if you also like baseball, there are some incredible pennant races going on in the state of California. The Giants making things interesting, but the Dodgers, the Padres, even the Angels trying to make things interesting lately. Only a few months left to catch a ball game. SeatGeek has you covered there. And then with the NFL season in full force, preseason has begun. SeatGeek's got you covered there too. And right now, if you use code TFG10 at checkout, you will save up to $20 on top of already getting the best prices, and you'll support my channel in the process. So that is code TFG10 at checkout, and I hope you have a great time wherever you are headed. But let's begin breaking down this fascinating 49ers roster, beginning with the quarterback room. Taking a look at their offseason changes here, nothing major. They did say goodbye to a pair of backups from last year, Josh Dobbs, Brandon Allen. And then Kyle Shanahan finally gets his guy, Mac Jones, who he maybe wanted ahead of Trey Lance in that draft. Potatoes. He's here now as their backup. Decent little signing, though, for Purdy, who does miss some time. I think Mac Jones could probably play pretty well here. So I like that as an addition. And then Curtis Rourke as well in the 7th round. Another nice value add in the 7th round. So it's tough to call the room upgraded when you're not touching the starter. But because Mac Jones, I think, is one of the better backups in the league, and like I said, Purdy is a guy that has missed some time, I did say this was at least slightly upgraded for the quarterback room. Whereas we normally don't even say that for, backups changing hands. But this one stood out to me. But let's get into it. So Brock Purdy has kind of quickly become the most polarizing quarterback to discuss, I think, especially with him getting that big contract this offseason. And I don't know if where I've got him ranked is me being the highest out there on Brock Purdy or anything like that. I've got him as the 16th overall quarterback in the league, 14th as a passing quarterback, getting passed up by a couple other heavier rushing threats out there. But I do think, generally speaking, I will be here to defend Brock Purdy as a good tier 3 quarterback, which generally speaking is worth paying for a team. Does it put you in the most ideal situation to win a Super Bowl where you end up paying a guy at this level relatively close, if not exactly the same, to what a lot of the elite quarterbacks get that are going to put you in a better perennial situation to compete and win Super Bowls? Yeah, like being a tier 3 QB means things got to be pretty close to perfect if things are going to go all the way for your team. It's not the ideal spot to be in, but compared to the alternative, it is almost always going to be preferable, especially if you're a team like the Niners where you do love your coaching, you do love your star talent, you do think you can put the right pieces around a guy like Brock Purdy to go all the way and have already gotten within a couple of plays away from winning a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy. So I certainly am not here to bang on the Niners for giving Brock Purdy a massive contract extension. It just comes with the recognition that, yeah, things are going to get even harder from a roster building perspective for San Francisco here moving forward. That's going to put even more pressure on John Lynch to hit on late first, second, and third round draft picks, something he has struggled to do for the most part. But as a quarterback, I like a lot of the stuff that Brock Purdy does. I think from a processing and decision-making standpoint, he is probably inside the top 8 of NFL starters, just in terms of consistently making the most of the structure of his offense. So many fans, and I think football fans have gotten smarter about throwing this term around, system quarterback. It's more like that, the idea of a in-structure quarterback. But that doesn't mean it's not important. There are so many quarterbacks that fail and aren't as good as Brock Purdy who have better out-of-structure playmaking ability that don't consistently get the most of well-structured offense like a Brock Purdy does with his processing, decision-making, anticipation, and generally speaking, accuracy. I don't think he's incredibly accurate. He doesn't have the most incredible arm talent. So you do actually see some throws get away from him. Throws go high over the middle of the field. He can short arm a deep out at times. So, like, that's part of the drawback on Brock Purdy. But I think, again, the processing and decision-making is top 8. And then really where Brock Purdy is super underrated is that he definitely is not the kind of prototype, old-school definition of a system quarterback. At least to me, that means you can only play within structure if you have to get into scramble, drill, and make something happen. A system quarterback theoretically can't do that. That's not Brock Purdy at all. Some of the best stuff he does is his pocket presence, is his like super underrated athleticism. Is he super fast? No. But he has really an explosive lower half. He's got some contact balance to get out of sacks. And he, like, because he is pretty strong in his base, he can really reset and make throws off platform, even if his natural arm talent, it's in the bottom 3 of like real starters in the NFL. It just is. But when you're talking about a guy that, for the most part, is going to maximize the structure of your offense, and when it's not there, can create and make stuff happen to create explosive plays and keep drives alive, that's a really good player. And by the way, they'll even lean into some of his legs in the design run game as well. It's nothing crazy, but once every other week or so, they'll mix in a read option, or he'll keep it on a play action boot threat, and like be an actual design rushing threat that can give you a little bit of those numbers advantages as well. So that's a slight benefit to Brock Purdy as well. Now, there's drawbacks to Brock Purdy, no doubt. That's why he ranks as the 16th quarterback for me, right? And I think for me at least, it is almost all surrounding his arm talent. I think it is hard to come up with 3 or 4 like actual NFL starters, not like fringe starters competing for jobs here in preseason, but like guys with starting NFL quarterback jobs. It's hard to come up with a list of 2 or 3 guys with, weaker arms than Brock Purdy. Purdy, in fact, might have the weakest arm among NFL starters. So what that means is, number one, you're just a little bit more limited in terms of the depth and width of throws that you can make. Your playbook is just shrunk down a little bit more. some of those deep outs and, targeting a guy on a go ball 55 yards down the field like a lot of NFL starting quarterbacks are capable of doing, or throwing back across, the field a little bit on some of these play action rollouts where you're kind of creating that distant target on the opposite side of the field that a zone coverage can lose track of when everything's going the opposite direction. There are certain throws that Brock Purdy just can't make, and that's a limiting factor for him. And then it does impact his accuracy, in my opinion. He just cannot command the football as consistently as a lot of the game's greats can. So if you are targeting a deep dig, or if he is trying to, hit a guy streaking down the sideline, he's going to be off his target a little bit more than some other starters. So to me, that's like 90% of the criticism on him. I think the other small, footnotes you might make on him is, while he is a good processor and decision maker, that's much more of a strength in his game than it isn't. There are still some forced reads, some predetermined things, or not seeing linebackers at times. I think he can continue to get better and better at eliminating some of those turnover-worthy plays, but it's not like he's reckless or anything close to it. But a 3% turnover-worthy play rate puts him 22nd in the league, right next to guys like, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff. There's room to get better in terms of putting the ball in harm's way. It's not horrible, it's average, but room to get better there. And then I'd love to see him seemingly not get banged up for a couple games every year. So, there are knocks on Brock Purdy. I'm not going to sit here and say he can't be a top 10 quarterback, as he is still young. The processing and decision-making is well ahead of the learning curve, relative to his age. So if he can become one of the truly, elite mental surgeons of NFL defenses, that would be a potentially elite trait paired with his improvisational skills that, he could be kind of like a little bit of like a poor man's Joe Burrow, I think, would be like the best case scenario for Brock Purdy. I'm not necessarily putting the up arrow on him. I think most likely this is who Brock Purdy is, a good quarterback that you can win a Super Bowl with, but he's going to be more, dependent on the surrounding cast around him lifting you up to that level. But I do find myself ultimately going to bat for Brock Purdy when he does have a lot of haters and detractors out there. And while this roster is going to have a lot of aspects of it with question marks attached to it, I don't have any question marks about Brock Purdy, what his floor is, and what he's going to bring to the table for this Niners team this year, injuries excluded. So they're in a good, maybe not great spot there with the quarterback room. And then I do like having Mac Jones here. I alluded to it a little bit with the offseason changes, but if Brock Purdy is a guy that's getting banged up and you need a couple of starts, Mac Jones can do that. And I actually, in a nightmare scenario where he has to play an extended period of time in this offense, Mac Jones could have a bit of a career resurgence. He is very similar to Brock Purdy in that I think when he was as a rookie in New England, before that horrible surrounding cast really forced him to lose all his confidence, he was at a very young age seeing defenses very well, could attack very similar parts of the field that Brock Purdy does. And likewise, Mac Jones, I think, a very underrated play extender. He's not a great athlete, but when he was confident and earlier on in his career and coming out of Alabama, he did have tremendous pocket presence, an ability to extend plays in and out of the pocket, even if the physical capabilities were a little bit more limiting there. There are a lot of similarities between a Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. So if nothing else, as a ideal backup where they can run their offense without having to change anything, I like that. But if he had to play for an extended period of time, is it the craziest thing to imagine him actually playing at about a top 20 quarterback level and this Niners team, frankly, being maybe even just fine with him, still being in the kind of championship picture with Mac Jones? I know it's crazy to even think about that, but if he's going to sign anywhere and that's going to happen and he can get his career back on track, it just might be here. And for what it's worth, he really wasn't bad plugging into that disastrous Jacksonville situation for the second half of last year. He was adequate in that situation. So if nothing else, one of the better backups in the league here in Mac Jones. And then they take Curtis Rourke in the 7th round. Solid 7th round pick. A lot of Nick Foles to his game. Really no athleticism at all, but good at kind of putting the ball downfield with a little bit of that touch and arc on his throws. Sees the field very well. I see what they like in him as well. As a QB3, I think he's fascinating. But yeah, smack dab in the middle of the league right here. 16th overall quarterback ranking, 14th in passing. Let's discuss this group of weapons for the Niners, and this is where our question marks are going to start coming to the table, and plenty of them. And as we look at their offseason changes, I am going to include the running back room here with the weapons. We do talk about the backs and their receiving capabilities here in this segment anyway, but especially with someone like Christian McCaffrey involved here, who is, at the peak of his powers, the premium receiving threat out of the backfield in the NFL. He definitely needs to be a part of this conversation. And both with Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk, massive yellow-coded to be determined in terms of whether they got better with their weaponry from this offseason. Two guys that were essentially unavailable for this team last year due to injuries, hoping to make their returns this year. McCaffrey at this point in time is good to go, and Brandon Ayuk is out there running some routes on grass, and they're kind of playing it safe with him. Might be more of a week 5-ish return or so, but not just can these guys get back on the field, because we are going to see them play for the Niners this year. What version of themselves are they, and how long can they stay on the field, are just going to be the biggest of question marks, not just for this group of weapons, but for this Niners team generally speaking. So very hard to say if they got better with the weapons. Certainly more questions added. But as we go through all of the change here, in terms of losses, Deebo Samuel is going to be the highlight loss there. By name, that's a big loss. If you watch the Niners last year, I think it's more of a moderate, notable loss. He just wasn't the same last year. They, made a pretty quick decision to move on from him from what they've seen from Deebo. So, I think they can stomach it, but it is a big name to lose from this group. He's done some really good things for the Niners here. Beyond that, as far as pass catchers are concerned, it's basically nothing. Chris Conley and Eric Saubert. So you say goodbye to Deebo, but you make some, additions here for sure. They are hoping to get Brandon Ayuk back, but Demarcus Robinson gets brought in here. He's probably going to face a suspension to start the season. And then they draft Jordan Watkins in the 4th round, on top of some other interesting additions we can mention when we really break this group of weapons down. But obviously, they're counting on Brandon Ayuk to basically replace what they're losing in Deebo Samuel there. At tight end, they did sign Luke Farrell, more of a blocking contributor here. And then at running back, beyond Christian McCaffrey, they did draft Jordan James in the 5th round. They bring Jeff Wilson back after some time in Miami. And then even Corey Kiner, an interesting undrafted free agent pickup, who I did see got hurt in the preseason game that started as I sat down to record this. That was probably a huge mistake on my end, given my record of guys getting hurt as soon as it's time for their deep dive throughout this summer. So we'll see what the news is on that. And then they are losing Jordan Mason. That's a loss that would more show up if we were revealing this for the run game side of things as opposed to the weapons. He was not much of a pass catcher here. But anyway, let's dive into this group of weapons. A lot to get into. So almost an impossible group to put a ranking on. I mean, seriously, how do you rank a group where your number one wide receiver is a total injury question mark in Brandon Ayuk, your elite receiving back, Christian McCaffrey, who's dealing with Achilles tendonitis, with Ayuk hurt? They're going to be leaning on a year 2 first-round rookie in Ricky Pearsall with upside that also dealt with injuries and got shot in his rookie season. And then George Kittle's also 32 years old and can't use smelling salts on the sideline anymore. So you tell me how you want to rank the 49ers weapons. It is an impossible task, but a unit that just last season ranked at the top of the league for me as, I think I had them tied with the Dolphins coming off the heels of Tyreek Hill's elite season. for the best group of weapons in the NFL. That sort of upside is still relatively on the table here for San Francisco. So they're a wild card in the sense of things could go extraordinarily well with this group, and things could be even worse than they were last year, maybe, with Debo gone. Not that I think it's likely, but this group is the wild card of wild cards. So you've got Brandon Ayuk as your number one wide receiver. We know when he's healthy, he gets that big contract with all the kind of holdout drama heading into last year. He is a number one do-it-all kind of alpha wide receiver. I wouldn't put him in the elite category, but that's who he was. Someone that can threaten all three levels of the field, makes tough catches, is an awesome run after catch threat. But having not really practiced last year, kind of jumps in there early, got a slow start, and then it felt like he was finally kind of getting up to speed within this offense. And then he goes down with a devastating knee injury. Going to be a long road to recovery for a guy that I'm not going to say he depends on his juice and explosiveness, but his speed and acceleration is obviously a massive part of what makes Brandon Ayuk himself. So when does he get back out there, and what version of himself is he when he does? Total question mark, right? And then someone that I think was very much drafted in Brandon Ayuk's image, I think they got some cold feet when it came to like Brandon Ayuk holding out of that final season. Them with Super Bowl expectations, they didn't want to just depend on Ricky Pearsall, who I think was even banged up at the time of Ayuk's extension. Can't remember the exact timeline of when he dealt with getting shot in his shoulder. Not to laugh, but I mean, that just goes to show you what all this Niners team was dealing with last year. But yeah, I think they kind of got a little bit of cold feet, extended Ayuk. I really felt like when you looked at their contract structures and upcoming free agents, when they drafted Ricky Pearsall, he was in the image of Brandon Ayuk, someone with really good speed, vertical threat, hitting ability, but awesome after the catch, runs great routes. Their size profile is even similar. So theoretically speaking, with Ayuk, with Pearsall, who I think really did show those flashes once he got healthy last year, showed some really tough catches and extraordinary route running. There's a lot of hope that he can really step in and play well until Ayuk can get back to speed, that he can be insurance as well if Ayuk has to be more of a, slow burn recovery, be more of a number 3, number 4 target in this offense. There's a lot of upside for Ricky Pearsall as a first-round pick last year to be a hit for this team and really, I don't know if save their ass is the right term, but at least be a saving grace here. So he's a wild card factor in terms of how much he can step up, where he was mostly just a splash play guy last year that you're excited about, but hasn't proven that consistency in the league quite yet. And then, yeah, obviously if Ayuk returns to full speed and Ricky Pearsall's a hit, getting those first 4 or 5 weeks to prove what he can do, all right, we're starting to cook with some gas here. And then we can talk about George Kittle, who, for my money, is still the best true tight end in the NFL today. You could argue if Brock Bowers is the better receiving entity. I think him and Kittle are very close. But the fact that Kittle is probably the best blocking tight end in the league with actual size to do what he does in line, I'm still going to give that full credit to George Kittle. That's not to take anything away from Brock Bowers. But especially with the highlight of him as a receiving entity, he's still an elite weapon, and at 32 years old has really shown no sign of regression. This could be an area where the Niners not really leaning on him heavily for a large part of his career. There's really just been kind of like stretches where they've needed to lean into him as more of a heavy target getter in this offense. We saw some of that last year. But this could be where, okay, maybe there's a little bit less wear and tear on his body. I don't know. But clearly didn't look like he was slowing down last year. Still an elite run after catch threat. Still a good route runner for the tight end position. Catches everything. And even last year, he cleaned up some of the drops that had shown up in 2023. He goes from almost a 9% drop rate to a 2.5% drop rate last year. But also a career year in contested catch percentage. Came down to 12 out of 17 contested catch targets. So doing some of that big-bodied, reliable tight end stuff that, not to say he hasn't done it in the past, he's always been good at that, but was like elite at that in terms of drop consistency and winning tough catches. So at the end of the day, he's like your ultimate floor raiser, where if things go wrong with Ayuk, Pearsall, McCaffrey, yeah, at least you have George Kittle, right? Like, I may have hinted at earlier, like, this group has the downside of being, maybe one of the worser groups of weapons in the league. I don't think worser is a word, but you get the point. That probably is not true. Like, worst case, this is probably still like 18th, 19th, mostly because of George Kittle. The only holdup there is like, all right, he is 32 years old, and what if like him playing like a psychopath is because he does smelling salts before every drive? Like, what if that actually does slow him down? I don't know. I'm certainly, mostly joking there and not counting on regression from him, though. But then he can go to Christian McCaffrey. I don't feel the need to like analyze Christian McCaffrey. I feel like it's pretty well understood that this is a guy that, if he were listed as a slot wide receiver, would be in the conversation for, Amon-Ra St. Brown's obviously a very special player, but maybe after Amon-Ra St. Brown, like, who's the best slot weapon in the league? McCaffrey, if that's all he did, he would be in that group. Route running, speed, run after catch, obviously. Like, he has legitimate receiving chops for a running back. And all of the different mismatch stuff that Kyle Shanahan can do with that is actually a really big deal, because he can force teams to come out and prepare for like heavy personnel and come out and base defense, and then scheme Christian McCaffrey matched up on like linebackers, which is like uncoverable. So if healthy, McCaffrey is the biggest difference making running back in the league. He is the only running back in the league, like, even close to making the impact that he makes in the receiving game. Everybody else is chopped liver compared to his elite impact to the group of weapons. But obviously, like, all the talk about how healthy he is and how healthy can he stay as the season goes on at 29 years old, which is not a death sentence for a running back, but it's getting up there. He deals with Achilles tendonitis. That's some scary stuff from last year, but hey, all reports are right now he's in great shape. They feel very good about what he's going to do. He's primed for like a peak, like, comeback player of the year season. So he is the ultimate risk for ranking this Niners team, for fantasy draft situations. Like, where is your tolerance for risk with Christian McCaffrey? But the signs are positive right now, and the season starts in 2 weeks. So that's good news, at least. And then you're not done. You got Jauan Jennings. It's been really fun to see him, I think, get the credit he deserves. We've really praised him the last several of deep dives, just talking about how much of a thorn in the side of opposing defenses he's been over the years. With the explosiveness that all these other weapons bring to the table, Jauan Jennings has been that guy running routes at the sticks, catching balls short of the sticks, making guys miss, contributing as a run blocker to open things up for all these guys, making tough catches down in the red zone and to keep drives alive. He has been such an asset for this team, and frankly, such a steal. I don't know if he hit the open market, if teams were smart enough to throw more money at him, but he's been so dramatically underpaid on a 2-year, $12 million contract he signed last offseason. I know there was some talk about him wanting a new deal. I haven't heard anything about that. I think he's probably going to play this year from what I can tell. So we're penciling him in here, and he's another floor raiser, here with him and George Kittle. Now, those two guys being the safe pieces here, those aren't necessarily your vertical explosive options. Kittle has some verticality to his game, and certainly after the catch is explosive. But you get the point. Like, you can't just have Jauan Jennings and George Kittle. You need the field to be opened up as well. But I love Jauan Jennings. I hope he does get a nice contract for his sake. Someone that came into the league as a 7th-round pick, has not been fairly compensated. And when he had to play last year, he showed that he can be a legit number 2 wide receiver. And he's lucky it was in his own, state of residence, because if he went to any other state and did what he did to the LA Rams, he wouldn't have been welcomed back inside those borders. He had one of the receiving games of the season against the Rams last year. Congrats to anybody that had him in your starting fantasy lineups that week, where he had 11 catches for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. But yeah, he's a really good player. He has to play that specific role within this offense. I think he showed last year he can do a little bit more, to the point that, all right, if we're talking about Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey out the gate, it's a very good starting point until Ayuk can get back out there. And then you're not done. You got Demarcus Robinson. They bring him in. He's been a very solid kind of wide receiver 3.5 the last couple of years. Familiar with an offense of this style, played for the Rams last year, and made some really like clutch catches for that Rams team. Now, he is likely facing suspension. We're getting pretty close up to the start of the season, so we'll see how that goes. If he does, it's just going to be a few games. So with all the other question marks here, it's another thing, but relative to things like McCaffrey and Ayuk's health, it's pretty minimal. Then you got a 4th-round pick in Jordan Watkins. A lot of vertical threatening ability from him. I liked him as a prospect. I think where they took him made sense. Far from a sure thing, but he definitely has some juice to get down the field and play a part of that role. Jacob Cowing as well was drafted in that image. So, as vertical threat specialists, those two guys can duke it out. They also draft Junior Bergen in the 7th round. I'm not familiar with his game. We'll see what they can get from him if he makes this team. I think out the gate, there's a pretty good chance he makes it, especially if Robinson is suspended and then maybe goes back to the practice squad. And then they kind of took some flyers on some vets here. Russell Gage was a really good physical slot in his prime, but he has not really been a factor for 3 years as he's been injured. Isaiah Hodgins, a very fun, big-bodied wide receiver that the league just kind of forgot about, in my opinion. Kind of in the Juwan Jennings image. So if they want to kind of get Hodgins up to speed, and if they're preparing to maybe lose Juwan Jennings in a year, maybe could be someone that is like interesting for next year's Niners, or if Jennings gets hurt. But then you got Robbie Chosen Anderson in that vertical threat mold, probably not going to make this team if we're being honest. And then even Malik Turner made some plays 3 years ago or so. So a lot of flyers on some veterans that have played there. We'll see if any of those guys can make this team. And then that's pretty much it, honestly. I mean, in terms of other running backs getting involved in the receiving game, it's probably Jeff Wilson, honestly, if McCaffrey is hurt. All these other guys are super young and unproven. Guarendo's more of a one-track athlete and a screen threat, whereas is he someone that can actually come out and do some of the route running stuff they ask of these backs? I don't necessarily see that. Keyshawn Vaughn, maybe, if he's put things together. I mean, they were excited about him working with Tom Brady, and he drove Tom Brady mad, never in the right place at the right time, but, he's been around long enough. Maybe he's learned a thing or two. He had some receiving chops coming out of Vandy once upon a time. But then your other, kind of bigs, your tight ends and fullbacks here. Kyle Juszczyk will make his splash play or two throughout the course of the season. Luke Farrell gets brought in here to be their 12 personnel, big-bodied blocker. Braden Willis, kind of that hybrid end, tight end, fullback type. Really nothing too exciting between the tight ends and the running backs in the receiving game after your core starters there. So a damn near impossible group of weapons to rank. I think the range here is like number 3 to number 20 in the league in terms of weapons. Just comes down to health and recovery. But that narrative obviously doesn't change here, as our next segment is talking about the running backs as, ball carriers, as an impact in the run game. And that's obviously going to be highlighted by Christian McCaffrey as well. We praised all of his receiving chops earlier, but as a running back, again, there are no questions at this point that a healthy Christian McCaffrey is at worst the 4th best running back in the NFL, maybe 5th, pending Ashton Jinty in his rookie season. But we don't need to reiterate the points on his health. And frankly, I don't think there's too much left to say about Christian McCaffrey. Not only is his availability and recovery paramount for the receiving game, but it's even bigger for the run game here. Like the gravity of his uncertainty is as large as any non-quarterback in the league. And to say that about a running back in the year 2025, might be surprising, but he's so much more than a running back. But yes, of course, as a running back, he's incredible. Explosive playability, vision, contact balance, you name it. We love Christian McCaffrey. But because of the health questions, you've got to have a longer conversation about some of these backups and what they could bring to the table if you have to count on them for an extended period of time. And Jordan Mason is gone here. They were able to lean on him for a little bit until he got hurt last year, and he's a very good runner. So they did end up going to Isaac Guerendo late in the season, their rookie 4th-round pick out of Louisville. And I would say he looked as advertised coming out of Louisville, where the explosive playability with that speed train threat style, where once he does clear, around that edge on a wide zone run or, get him out in space, however you can, this is an elite athlete that is an incredibly, he's a big play threat and an incredibly challenging player to get on the ground once he gets rolling. In terms of vision, stop-start athleticism, I don't think he has incredible acceleration to run every type of run scheme that they want to run here in San Francisco, at least until proven otherwise. That's where the Jordan James pick comes in. Jordan James is the opposite of Isaac Guerendo. Feels like he's about half his size, not nearly the speed, but couldn't be any different in terms of the way they move. Jordan James is more of a sudden stop-start athlete. Call him a jitterbug if you want. I don't know that he's necessarily elite at making guys miss, but in terms of the way he moves, very different, and vision from him was spectacular. In fact, I put down as my pro comp on him at least shades of Kyren Williams. So if McCaffrey gets hurt, I think this is going to be most likely, and Jordan James is hurt right now himself, so he's got to get healthy and get back out there. But I think if McCaffrey's unavailable, I think we very likely see something close to a 50-50 split. Maybe more 60-40 in favor of Jordan James, where he's the more reliable, get what's blocked up type, and then Isaac Guerendo is rotating in there for big play threat ability. But both these guys are capable backs for what they are. I like them as backups, and if you have to get into a duo split of both those guys, putting them in, the right spots for their skill sets to succeed, I think they can be just fine with those two young players. They still got to prove out who they are at their best, but you could do worse than a pair of interesting 4th-round picks there in Guerendo and Jordan James. Then you got some veterans in Patrick Taylor, who brings some size. Jeff Wilson, who Niners fans are familiar with here. He's not quite as explosive as he once was, but he's a guy that if you're frustrated with the youth of Guerendo and James for one reason or another, you at least know what you have from a reliability standpoint in Jeff Wilson. We'll see if he even makes the team. You got Corey Kiner. We'll see if he is healthy. I know there was some news that just came out from the preseason that he's banged up, so hopefully he can be healthy. It might not be the worst thing for him if he ends up getting kind of that roster cheat, where if he is hurt, the team could put him on IR, and then he could be in a better position to make this team next season, because it is going to be tough with all these names for a guy like Corey Kiner as an undrafted pickup, but he's got that kind of contact balance build. I definitely thought he was draftable. He had a 40% missed tackle force rate, which is elite territory at Cincinnati last year. Just not a great athlete, but very stocky, good contact balance. And then, I guess Keyshawn Vaughn, I'd be a little bit surprised if he made this team. I feel like he's maybe more just practice squad insurance for a Christian McCaffrey injury, because he probably does have the most route running potential of any back in this group. So there's your rundown of the group. Again, how do you rank this 49ers running back room? When healthy, this is a top 5, running back group with an elite running back. Can we guarantee that health? No, I think you have to just kind of play it down the middle at least a little bit. And that's the way I'm doing it here, really, with the weapons and the running back group, playing it down the middle, accounting for some injury potential. And as far as the running back ranking is concerned, that lands them with a B+ grade, getting them 8th to 11th. Granted, this has a massive spectrum, even more than the weapons, where this could be, I don't know, number 1, number 2, number 3. I mean, McCaffrey was the crowned number 1 back in the league just a year ago. Or this could be 30th, 31st, like anything short of what the Dallas Cowboys are working with. Like, I think that's the range of possibilities on the Niners, depending on if McCaffrey's out there or not. Very hard group to rank. And not just to rank, but like, going back to what we said in the intro, like this is a key wild card in the sense of if this Niners team's going to, exceed expectations, Christian McCaffrey and his health is a big part of that versus him not being there and this team maybe disappointing a little bit. But let's continue forward here and talk about the offensive line. It's a pretty similar group, but they did make some changes this offseason, most notably saying goodbye to Aaron Banks, who the Packers gave $19 million to per year for some reason. But, a moderate loss. He started for them, but most Niners fans aren't going to miss Aaron Banks. And then Jalen Moore also got a pretty nice deal from the Chiefs, 2 years, $30 million to compete for his starting tackle job. He stepped in and did play pretty well when Trent Williams went down for the last kind of third of the season last year. The only additions they did make was a 7th-round pick in Connor Colby out of Iowa. So the Niners aren't in panic mode, as we'll see, but it is a group that is slightly downgraded. They definitely lost some capable players in Banks and Jalen Moore. But this offensive line is still in pretty good shape, in my opinion. They rank for me as the 12th overall offensive line. Worse in pass blocking, where they rank 14th to 23rd, a C+ grade there. So solid in that regard. And then pretty damn good in run blocking with a B grade ranking 11th in the league. And they do get helped as well by being alone as the best team in the league in terms of getting a boost from their skill blockers. We don't even mention this for every team because there's a massive cluster where, tight ends, receivers, it's just adequate or not really worth talking about. It is worth talking about with the Niners. These guys get after it. They demand it. And all these guys really are good, from George Kittle to bringing in Luke Farrell to Juszczyk as the fullback, Jawan Jennings, maybe the best blocking receiver in the league, you name it. But let's go through this group from left to right, starting at left tackle with Trent Williams. And here we go again with one of these major wild card highlight players. Trent Williams turns 38 years old here in 2 days. It can be done. Andrew Whitworth did it. Jason Peters did it. But you're getting into pretty scary territory here at that age, especially for a guy that did miss about 6 games last year. As we sit here today, as far as I can tell, they're not too worried about it. He seems good to go. I know earlier in the offseason, there were some questions about his availability and that kind of stuff, but haven't really heard a peep now, so it seems good to go. And look, Trent Williams is such a freak athlete, and when he did play last year, he was still outstanding, that I feel pretty good saying, as long as he is healthy and, someone's not landing on him funny or anything like that, you're still talking about one of the best offensive linemen in the league. Maybe has lost a little bit to the sense that I would say he's been maybe passed up by Penei Sewell for the best run blocking tackle and maybe even offensive lineman in the league. But even then, it's dude, I gave Trent Williams last deep dive in 2020, for the 2024 one, a 100 run blocking grade. This dude has, to just call him a Hall of Famer is an understatement. He is one of the best offensive linemen to ever do it. And he's an awesome pass blocker, too. He's maybe even getting better in that regard if you break down his pass blocking efficiency over the last 3-4 years. But he's got all the traits to be outstanding in that regard, too. So he is a wild card at his age. There's moderate cause for concern there, but things seem to be in a good spot right now a couple of weeks before the season. So we'll see where he's at, but he's obviously their best player, and you're hoping will be their best player, and then he'll be available. It's no guarantee, but at least as we sit here today, he's a core reason why the Niners still get pretty good ratings for their offensive line. He really is that good to elevate a group like this. But it is still a weak link position, so you want to eliminate having liabilities here, and I think they're in a pretty good spot to do that. They have one piece here at left guard that they need to not be horrible. This is why they're saying goodbye to Aaron Banks and counting on Ben Bartch to really keep it up. He did play 3 games last year and honestly was pretty good. This was a talented 4th-round pick out of the biggest rival of my alma mater, but he went to St. John's, Minnesota. Go Tommies, if there's any people involved in that rivalry watching here. But yeah, Barch didn't work out in Jacksonville, as most, players that go to Jacksonville don't work out. Sorry, Jags fans, but it's kind of true. Probably wasn't getting the best coaching there. And, he's 27 years old. Making that adjustment from Division III football, it was going to take some time for Ben Barch. But when he did play last year, they saw enough to say, hey, we're going to let you compete for a left guard spot. And as of today, he's winning that job over some of these other competitors like Spencer Beerford, who started a lot of games for them, and Nick Zakelj. I think there's reason to be cautiously optimistic about Barch, to the point that he might even be better than Aaron Banks, frankly. I don't think that's crazy. And his run blocking tape has been pretty good. It's just been the pass blocking stuff. But this is a Kyle Shanahan system with the use of play action that does protect these guys in pass pro as well. So he's your biggest question mark outside of Trent Williams' age in terms of having a weak link in this group. We'll see where that goes, but definitely kind of a breakout candidate here at this point in time. And then at center, you got Jake Brendel. He's proved to be the definition of a replacement level starter at center. He's athletic, he's smart, he's tough, and that's about where you stop on the compliments for him. But he does the right thing in the run game. He's good enough to reach block and get to his spots. Not a enforcer by any stretch of the imagination. If you isolate him in pass pro, look out if you're Brock Purdy. But they do a good job protecting him with double teams within the scheme as a pass blocker, and they've certainly survived with him. They're not worried about him as the center here. It's just not a guy that's going to elevate this group, certainly. Then you got at right guard, someone that you are certainly excited about on this offensive line. And if anybody's going to be the best player on this unit other than Trent Williams, it's definitely going to be Dominique Puny. Third-round pick last year, and just a slam dunk. Dominant run-blocking tape for a rookie that really should only get better. You still saw some of those rookie mistakes where he would get over his skis, miss some assignments, and had a collection of negatively graded plays throughout the course of the season in the run game that you do expect. Another year in the system, just a year or two player, that's only going to get better and better and better. And then as a pass blocker, he was pretty damn good as well. A little more week to week in that regard, but mostly not a concern, should get better, stick in his hands, keeping his feet in front of guys. And the other thing is he was a tackle convert, so he's relatively new to this position. So this was the, draft steal that Niners fans have been waiting 3 years for, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, to find someone to make an impact, especially on this offensive line. I think Dominique Puny is what they were hoping Aaron Banks was going to be for them. So you're really excited for him, and the arrow is absolutely pointing up on what he can do year two and beyond. He has Pro Bowl potential as a guard here. He even got some of those talks last year. And then at right tackle, you got to tip your cap. Colton McKivitz has worked at his craft and settled in as a functional right tackle. Still struggles with the play strength side of things, and if he gets matched up against a dominant bull rusher, he's going to go for a ride. But outside of that, I think he has tapped into his athletic ability and his toughness to be a very adequate run blocker, and his technique has gotten better and better to utilize his hands and mix up his techniques so that he's not losing that inside leverages consistently and losing to the power. He's turned into a very solid player, and he's in a contract year as well. His renewal with this team a couple years ago has turned into a value for them, and he's kind of, I would say, settled in at sort of a Dan Moore type of level if you're talking about him being a free agent, maybe getting paid this upcoming offseason. But ultimately, it's a very solid group with some question marks there. Left tackle, age-related, and Ben Barch just very unproven at left guard. Now, depth is a concern, so these guys got to stay healthy. Your tackle depth is essentially non-existent. Spencer Beerford now listed as a tackle. I like that for him. He just was never comfortable at guard, but as one of these athletic tackles that, playing out in space a little bit more, Spencer Beerford's best trait is his feet. And he was a tackle coming out. So I think even if he is a little bit lighter, in the image of someone like Colton McKivitz, could he maybe surprise back at tackle and develop into a replacement for Colton McKivitz and be kind of a low-end starting caliber guy? That's the dream for Spencer Beerford, but he has not played well in the NFL when they've asked him to start. So that's very unproven. Austin Pleasant's very unproven. He got some time last year. but you're definitely much more worried now with Jason Moore gone, who is obviously a very valuable backup for them. He played well with Trent Williams missing some time last year. You're not as insulated for injuries at that tackle spot as you were, so got to keep Trent upright, especially. Inside, they have a little bit more interest. You have Matt Hennessy, who didn't have to play last year because Jake Brendel stayed healthy, but I actually think Matt Hennessy in this offense has a ton of potential. He's dealt with some injuries, and he can't pass protect to save his life. But, dude, his run blocking tape in Atlanta was unreal. They just got tired of him getting beat one-on-one in pass pro. If he can just clean that up a little bit, he could be a better center than Jake Brendel because he's got the athletic levers to be that. But as a backup to Jake Brendel, I think he's just fine. And then your guard depth, Nick Zakelj, they drafted in the 6th round in 2022. I think he showed some development last year that, he could be something as a backup. His pass protection wasn't horrible, just in, 5 games. But as far as depth and an emergency replacement, if Ben Bartch really does struggle in pass protection, I think you have enough to be cautiously hopeful at that left guard spot between those two. And then they take Connor Colby, 7th round flyer out of Iowa. I didn't end up putting a write-up on him, but 7th round, never a horrible idea to just grab the Iowa guys. We'll see what they can get from him. But probably those 9 names are going to be your core roster locks, and then one more dude with an opportunity to compete maybe for a 10th offensive line spot here. But yeah, it's a pretty stable offensive line, not the craziest upside or anything like that. If Pooney takes another step forward, if Bartch turns out to be a pretty solid guy, and Trent Williams stays healthy, you're talking about a borderline top 10 offensive line here. And I don't think those 3 things happening are all that crazy. So we put all this together and we can rank the final offense here. So I have the Niners ranking 9th offensively, which you might think sounds high with all these injury concerns. I'm trying to navigate the best I can. We dinged the weapons group that obviously would be a top 10 ranking if we could guarantee health with those guys. We dinged the running back group that would be a top 5 ranking with guaranteed health on Christian McCaffrey. There's only so much we can do when we're plugging in numbers and we've got a formula that gives us these rankings back. But even if that does sound, a little bit high, 9th offensively, 5th in run game and 15th in passing game, I get the cause for concern with this offense, but this team was 9th in DVOA last year with all of the things they endured last year. So it might not be as crazy as you think with the coaching of a Kyle Shanahan behind all of this. And if they do get better luck with injuries, can this be a top 3 offense in the league? Undoubtedly, because we've pretty much seen that. When these guys are healthy, that's who this Niners offense is. So there's a lot of reason to be excited. There's a lot of reason to pump the brakes and have some concern on this team. I understand whichever side of, blowing caution to the wind that you want to take there. But needless to say, time will tell where this group can land this year. But unfortunately, a massive list of questions on this Niners team do not stop with the weapons and the backfield and some aspects of the offensive line. They carry over to this defense. So let's move on to that side of the ball. And we'll begin by taking a look at the offseason changes with the defensive line. So definitely some departures here. Probably the biggest of which is actually Malik Collins, who had a nice season for them. Second on the team in pressures. A moderate loss, for sure. Javon Hargrave, the bigger name there, who hardly played for them last year. He was a part of their injury woes. Just 10% of snaps there for him, but definitely by name, a moderate loss as well. And then on the edge, they also lose Leonard Floyd, who was okay and played 57% of their snaps. And then they're going with certainly a youth movement as they say goodbye to a group that combines for about 90 plus years of age between the 3 of those guys. Really 3 core rookie additions here, highlighted by Mykel Williams, their 1st round edge pick, along with their next pick in Alfred Collins along the interior of the defensive line, and then another 4th round pick in CJ West out of Indiana. And then they did make one veteran addition. They acquire Bryce Huff, a big move pass rushing specialist who dominated with Robert Saleh on the Jets. Really fun move. Now, as far as whether these groups got better, worse, or stayed the same, I do think on the edge there with Bryce Huff and the first-round pick of Mykel Williams, that group is upgraded, in my opinion. I like what they did there, and Leonard Floyd really wasn't much of a factor for them. As far as the interior of the defensive line, I do think Malik Collins was more of a factor, and Alfred Collins, it's going to be hard for him to be the better of the two Collins in his first season, though possible. But then, getting CJ West, can he be an added second piece there that you really didn't have in what you had from Javon Hargrave last year? So I did say to be determined on the interior of the defensive line. Saying this group got worse didn't quite feel right for me, but also saying it stayed neutral didn't feel right. So we'll keep it yellow-coded as a question mark there. But let's get into this defensive line, a unit that, again, you will see that wild card icon highlighting all of this group. But one thing you do have here is Nick Bosa, your biggest saving grace with this unit. The D-line overall for me ranks 16th to 17th. Their pass rush ranks 11th to 17th, and their D-line run defense ranks 20th to 23rd. Hey, you got one of the best defensive players in the league on this unit. That's going to set the floor and put you in a good spot to have some success, but also build around that player. Not just a player in Nick Bosa that dominates one-on-ones with his bull rush, with his kind of signature power swipe where he can kind of throw you off and then get to really underrated acceleration and bend that Nick Bosa has to turn that corner, get sacks, get strip sacks. So he can't just dominate one-on-one, but slides are heading his way. It's going to command chip help, which helps your coverage on the back end. One less target to worry about getting into your passing concepts quickly. Like, he changes the math of your entire defense. He's one of those true tier 1 elite perennial defensive player of the year type of guys. And Niners fans certainly will rest easy knowing that this D-line, it's going to be damn near impossible for this group to be bad when Nick Bosa is here. And that is reflected in the rankings because other than him, you have, I don't want to say close to nothing because there is some potential, and that's why this group gets the wild card icon. But my God, you are counting on a pair of rookies and a pair of rookies that were far from sure things coming out and a kind of reclamation project in Bryce Huff, a move I really like, but far from a proven in terms of what you're going to get from Bryce Huff. And then after those three pieces, I will say you got close to nothing. But let's talk about Mykel Williams. Opposite of Nick Bosa here, is going to be in a position to be this team's starter off the edge, really in a rotation with Bryce Huff. And at first look, when they took Mykel and it was really going to be just him as this team's number 2 edge rusher, it's not that I hated the pick, but I was like, oh, that's not going to be enough. Because with Mykel, he was injured a lot at Georgia. He played in that Georgia system where he spent a lot of time as a 4-eye and in an extension of their interior defensive line group. He's someone that just hasn't had the pass rush production and is very unproven as a pass rusher. In terms of his run defense stuff, it is damn good for a rookie. I think he enters the league with a lot of play strength, great technique, and if nothing else, should be a solid edge run defender out the gate and has potential to be a plus run defender on early downs, which can go a long way for a Niners defense that struggled to stop the run last year. That was a clear focus of their draft, getting someone like Mykel and Alfred Collins, who we'll talk about, and even CJ West, just putting yourself in a position where you can let a Nick Bosa wreck opposing game plans on those third down situations. If nothing else, Mykel Williams' ability to get you into those spots is going to be his biggest asset in his rookie season. As a pass rusher, though, he's got some traits. He's got, quick feet for a very big, very long edge rusher. He has natural power, but I wouldn't say he has an explosive first step in terms of lining up in a wide 9 where this defense likes to line up and, teeing off, with a power rush. You look at his physical profile, you would think he has that. You saw some flashes of power with his hands, and you're hoping you can coach that into him with Chris Kachurik, who's probably the best D-line coach in the league. but he's got a long way to go from a power profile. And then he actually mixed in some different finesse rush moves. I like that he tried stuff. It's just it was all with mixed results. And in terms of having an actual plan for when to use that, Georgia just didn't allow him to have that. So there's a lot of physical tools in there. I think best case scenario, he could turn into something like a Gregory Rousseau, which if Gregory Rousseau had a Nick Bosa opposite of him in Buffalo, that's phenomenal. So I think that's kind of the outlook for him. Developmental pass rusher, hopefully an impact run defender. But if that was all they were going to have, I would have a lot more questions here. The second they get Bryce Huff back here reunited with Robert Saleh, I oohed and awed over that addition. And honestly, I increased this team's overall pass rush grade. And given how close they are rated to like our last team with Denver, they jumped Denver in the power rankings with that move. This was a big move to go get Bryce Huff, and I'm very excited to see him here. It's just injured season last year where he was a big free agent signing for the Eagles and was a non-factor for them. So he's got to get back on track, but just a year removed from 2023 where he was one of the most efficient one-on-one pass rush beaters in the league, in a Robert Saleh defense in the same role where they didn't ask him to stop the run. They just had him come in fresh and be a flamethrower off the edge where he's got get off, bend, a little bit of power, and inside counters. I'm very optimistic, frankly, that they're going to get an impact player. And if you could combine what I think rookie year Mykel Williams is and Bryce Huff into one player, which is effectively what they're going to do with this rotation, that's a very good number 2 edge rusher. So I do like that combination of guys. It's just, it doesn't exactly work that way, right? You can do things schematically to either catch Mykel in pass rush situations or catch Bryce Huff in run defense situations. You can go hurry up and keep Bryce Huff off the field in those third down situations. There's things you can do to counter it. But for the most part, it's a good combination. And then Yetur Gross-Matos sticks around here. Look, YGM as an edge 4 that can just do a little bit of everything as an athletic type that never reached his physical potential. Sure, I can get behind that. You got Sam Ekwainonu as well, who I'm not quite ready to like put the up arrow on him or anything like that. He's very young and still technically could get better. He's an interesting body type for Robert Saleh to kind of move around here. About 6'1", 270 pounds, so that unique kind of leverage profile. We'll see what kind of plans they have for him. He could even potentially line up as like a 4-eye in their wide 9 looks, kind of in the John Franklin Myers role a little bit. Someone to maybe keep an eye on. You know, anything they get from him is a house money contribution to this D-line, an undrafted guy in 2023 that definitely showed some flashes, especially as a pass rusher last year. And then Robert Beal, another Georgia D lineman, very athletic guy, coming into his own a little bit as a run defender. Honestly, fighting for a roster spot, though. But as a 6th guy there, that's fine. So there's your edge group. And honestly, for the most part, you can feel pretty good about that unit with the edge. And that's a huge reason why this D-line still gets pretty respectable rankings. However, this might be the worst interior D-line in the entire league. And whether they are the worst or not is really going to hinge on what Alfred Collins can be here out the gate. And he's a very high floor run defender, a 2nd round pick that for me was probably more of like a late 2nd, early 3rd type of guy. We're splitting hairs here, but they did take him inside the top 50 of the draft with the 43rd pick. Whether you like it or not, there is a difference between going 43rd and 61st. And the expectations being placed on him here as a plug-and-play starter, it is a lot to ask of him based on what he was as a prospect. I think the natural opportunity for him would be to come in as a 3rd defensive tackle that will contribute on early downs. He's 6'6", 330 pounds. They have really developed defensive tackles well at Texas. These guys have come into the league with outstanding run defense technique, and I think that's going to be the case with Alfred Collins. He gets his hands inside. He can do the stack, peek, shed technique, get off blocks. He has enough weight to be a nose tackle. When he did face double teams at Texas, he would let his pads get high, and as a 6'6" guy, it's tough to play the nose at that size because guys will get up and under you and you'll lose that leverage battle. the quote-unquote ideal height for a lot of nose tackles is about 6'3", maybe 6'4". That's where your Vita Veas and Dexter Lawrence, Tavondre Sweat out of Texas, they're all much more in that range as opposed to a very tall 6'6". Now, the Niners run a lot more even fronts, using a pair of two techniques instead of having a true zero tech nose tackle. So as more of a one-gapping DT, I think Alfred Collins can step in and make an impact right away, but he's far from perfect and far from like a lock to just step in and be a good run defender. So he's got to prove it. And then the other thing on Collins, he just doesn't really have a pass rushing skill set. That's not what he did at Texas. In fact, his running mate, Vernon Broughton, I thought stood out way more as a pass rushing presence on the interior. He does have an effective push-pull swim that if he's like defending play action, you will see some like early down pressures from him, which is great, but not really much of a good first step or ability to uncoil at 6'6" and like get under guys' pads and rush with power. Hopefully that's something Chris Kachurik can develop with him. I don't think, naturally speaking, he's a bad athlete. I don't think he's a great athlete, but there's probably something to be unlocked there as a pass rusher. But yeah, that's where you're at. Like, he has to be your best defensive tackle. It's just not an ideal place to be. There's no way around it. Jordan Elliott is your other starter right now because Kevin Givens is coming off an injury and he's probably going to take some time to get back out there. Eventually, maybe a midseason return for Kevin Givens, he can become your number 2, which is an upgrade here. Look, Jordan Elliott has to have like blackmail on the NFL or something because I thought he got drafted too high in Cleveland. Because of that, he played too much in Cleveland. He gets a 2-year, $7 million here with the Niners. He sucked last year and he's still here as a starter. I don't get it. I really don't have anything nice to say about Jordan Elliott other than he's played a lot of snaps. He gets driven off the ball. He has developed nothing as a pass rusher. He doesn't have much power. Yeah, he is an athletic body. I guess I said something nice about Jordan Elliott, but the fact that he's a starter is a huge red flag for me. We mentioned Kevin Givens, though. Hopefully, as the season goes on, you can get Givens back into the mix. He's probably your highest projecting interior rusher, which it's not ideal, but can he split some gaps and run some of the twists and be an athletic guy up front? I like Kevin Givens, but he started to deal with some injuries and just has never really emerged as like a good full-time starter. He's probably, as a third guy, you would love him. As someone that might end up having to be your best defensive tackle, that's a bad spot to be. CJ West, an intriguing 4th-round pick, not dissimilar to Alfred Collins in that, he's not a horrible athlete, but probably plays with less athleticism on tape than his natural testing profile would indicate. Like, he just doesn't have much of a first step. They have to coach him to play fast and more aggressive in this system that they do want these guys to get off the ball quickly. So how quickly he can grasp that will be important for him, but very strong, stocky guy that has good kind of classic disengagement, block shedding technique. So there's something there. I think as a 4th-round pick that added up, but he was very raw other than just the raw block shedding ability. So we'll see what he can give them in his rookie season. You got Evan Anderson, who's a sawed-off, shotgun, fun, undrafted defensive tackle. As a part of the rotation, I think that's fine. And then you got Kalia Davis, who got on the field a little bit last year. He's been injured throughout his career as well. But yeah, it's not a defensive tackle group to write home about. And these edge rushers are going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting with this group. And I will say this, we did see a Robert Saleh defense with the Jets early last season. I think they took that interior D-line for granted a little bit. We saw them say goodbye to an Al Woods at nose tackle, goodbye to a John Franklin Myers, get much thinner in that interior D-line, and the Jets got ran all over. Niners fans know that. They saw that week 1 against the Jets. So that's going to be the primary concern right there is the interior D-line for this defense. This edge group can elevate that group and still give you a pretty solid pass rush for sure. But especially run defense and getting after the quarterback from the interior, you're really just hoping they can be adequate. And your best path to that is these rookies surprising and Kevin Givens getting back on the field, and that's about the only hope they have there. So not ideal with that unit, but there are clearly worse overall defensive lines in the league, all in the same. But let's go to the linebackers and talk about their offseason changes here. So certainly some changing of the guards in this unit next to Fred Warner. So last year, they went with the combination of Devondre Campbell and Dre Greenlaw. Greenlaw wasn't able to get back out there for them, unfortunately. They had to let him go in free agency, and then Devondre Campbell ended up getting benched. He had a weird season last year. Wasn't all that good stepping in initially. He eventually gets benched for D. Winters, who's going to be the starter we talk about here. But then when they asked him to go back in, because I think D. Winters got hurt, Niners fans, correct me if I'm misremembering this story, but Campbell was like, no, I'm not going back out there. And then they just kind of suspended him within the team instead of granting his release and letting him sign elsewhere. It was a wild narrative with him last year, but he is not much of a loss. Needless to say, neither, unfortunately, are the 3% of snaps that they got from Dre Greenlaw last year. But at the same time, the only addition they make is Nick Martin, who I think most people regarded as a reach there in the third round, which even Niners fans at this point are open to the idea that John Lynch lit a third-round pick on fire. We'll see, obviously, but not enough for me with that Nick Martin pick for me to say this unit is upgraded. But as we turn our eyes to breaking down this linebacker room, it's not that they weren't equipped to move forward, basically, with D. Winters as the LB2 here. So we'll talk about him, but first and foremost, we got to praise Fred Warner, man. The clear-cut best linebacker in the NFL. Ravens fans, I don't want to hear it. Roquan is a all-pro talent. He's awesome. He is still not really close to Fred Warner, honestly, in terms of starting a debate about who the best linebacker in the NFL is. Fred does everything. He is an elite mind in coverage. He's a tremendous athlete, crazy fluid hips, his ability to bounce around the field, his acceleration, but paired with his mind to break things down, where he doesn't just have the burst and the physical tools you need at this position to be great, but he has the mental. How many linebackers do we talk about? The TJ Edwards of the world, where, yeah, they're not amazing because they're slow, basically, but at least they're usually triggering a half step ahead of other freak athletes at the position. Fred's got that both consistently in both phases, run and pass, but he's super savvy at getting off blocks. He's not the biggest guy. He plays at about 235. But when you think about who are the best block shedders at the linebacker position, you would typically point to 245, 250 pound bigger guys, more in the DeMario Davis build. But Fred Warner is able to get off blocks, have the play strength aspect without compromising fluid athletic ability and that side of things too. So he's just unbelievable. Not to mention the ability to go for the ball. He's probably the best linebacker in the league with Darius Leonard no longer in it at punching the ball out, having those game-changing turnovers. You have got to stress ball security when you go against the Niners, or he's going to have that game-changing, fumbled forced. He blitzes. He does everything. He is the best linebacker in the league, and really the only linebacker that I think deserves Defensive Player of the Year consideration. Unbelievable weapon for this defense. And even if this team has major questions about D. Winters as a young player stepping in as LB2 here, I still have the Niners ranked as the number one overall linebacking unit in the league. It's not perfect. It's still an A- grade for your number one ranked linebacker unit. It's also, kind of a reflection of where the league is at in terms of no one really has that bona fide superstar linebacker duo in the league today. So that helps, but still, that goes to show you just how good Fred Warner is. And the Niners do rank first for linebacker coverage, whereas they do rank third to fourth for linebacker run defense. But enter D. Winters here, who got on the field at the end of last season, kind of edges out Devondre Campbell for those opportunities, and he shows a lot of promise. Far from perfection. In terms of run diagnostics, tackling consistency, he ain't there yet. Coming out of TCU, that was the question mark on him. He was a heat-seeking missile without a targeting system, but someone I did think was a great value in the 6th round. Someone with 4.49 speed that just showed the instincts and athleticism that you want to bet on. And his, let's see, that would have been his second to last game of his career against Michigan in those playoffs at TCU. Not the last game of his career because they went on and got boat raced the next week, but he finished strong, basically. That final game against Michigan in those playoffs was probably the best linebacker performance any player in his draft class had. So we've seen the flashes from him, and even last year we saw some flashes from him. Now in year 3, this is the right developmental window for a guy with his types of tools. And I said it when he got drafted, physically speaking, this guy is kind of a Dre Greenlaw clone. 5'11", 230 pounds, a lot of speed and instincts. Greenlaw himself entered the league a 5th-round pick. Winters a 6th-round pick. So that's the vision for him. I'm not ruling out that he has potential, like Dre Greenlaw did with this coach, Robert Saleh, developing into one of the best LB2s in the league. I think D. Winters, that's high praise, obviously, but it's all there to be done. It's just they got to get to work. He's got to develop. It's been a small sample size, and it's been up and down when he's been out there, but in that image of Dre Greenlaw, you can really see it here. So he, again, is a wild card for this team. I can't call the linebackers as a unit a wild card because you got Fred. You're going to be just fine with Fred. You're not going to be just fine. I have them essentially just with Fred, ranking as the best LB room in the league. But if D. Winters breaks out here in year 3, you go from you're kind of ranking by default to what we've seen with Fred and Greenlaw in their prime, where that duo was a effing problem to deal with, both those guys flying around. That can really elevate this defense even further than just Fred Warner is. Now, he's got to hold on to this job through camp. Right now, he is listed as the starter, but they have 3rd-round pick Nick Martin, trying to edge him out. Niners fans can let us know in the comments, how his camp has been and all that stuff. But this was, I'll say it, an egregious reach by John Lynch. Really not good tape at Oklahoma State. A D. Winters-esque prospect. If D. Winters went in the 3rd round, it would be a little bit more aggressive. It's not like D. Winters' full body of tape coming out was good. But similar idea where you're drafting speed and hoping the right coaching can develop the guy at a damn near impossible position to learn. Expecting that in year 1 from Nick Martin would be one of the bigger surprises of any player kind of in the conversation for playing time that we've talked about in this deep dive series. He is a true developmental project. The speed is up there. The desire to tackle is there. He can definitely be an impact on special teams while he develops here. But I would be pretty damn stunned if he ends up, edging out D. Winters, who's just had 2 extra years to learn this position ahead of him. Luke Gifford, more of a veteran signing they bring in here. Tatum Bethune was another kind of twitchy linebacker drafted in that image. We'll see if he can surprise as well. And then they did bring Chaz Surratt over from the Jets. I like this as an addition. He's pretty buried on the listed depth chart right now, so maybe not getting a whole lot of buzz in that camp. But he had to step out there for the Jets in a rotational role and definitely started to show some flashes. I liked Chaz Surratt coming out quite a bit. It was good to see him get out there for the Jets and good to see Saleh kind of take him over with him. So he clearly, likes what he sees there. We'll see if he makes this team first, and then it would be you kind of need okay, D. Winters to struggle, and then they have to decide who else to go to. You're pretty far away from seeing Chaz Surratt here, and it's definitely a reach, but former quarterback, a lot of athletic ability, started to show some of those flashes last season. Of all the backups here, he is the guy I'm most interested to see if he did get some playing time. But that is going to round out our linebacking group here for the Niners. Let's go ahead and move to the final part of this defense, the secondary. And we'll begin there by taking a look at their offseason changes, where they are seeing certainly some shakeup in the secondary. And for the podcast viewers that didn't see the graphic, I don't think I said this, but it was neutral at linebacker in terms of whether they got better or worse. But yeah, at cornerback, some names out the door here, especially Shavarius Ward, who I said is a moderate loss. he's a big addition for the Colts. He's a big bounce back candidate for 2025 and beyond. But due to the tragic loss of his baby daughter and him just not being there mentally, understandably so, he was not himself last year. Had some pretty down games. If we're just asking, is his loss a big loss compared to last year's cornerback room? It's not that Ward was like straight up horrible, but he was not his old self. He was kind of a adequate to below average corner. So more of a moderate loss there relative to what he was for this team last year. Though I think Niners fans would have loved to see him back. He couldn't stay close to home there. He had to have a change of scenery and move on, really. Understandably so. But the other one is Isaac Yiadom, who was Isaac Yiadom. He had some good games. He had some bad games. They don't re-sign him. He's going to be starting for the Saints this year again. But it's not like they made some crazy additions, right? They spent a third-round pick on Upton Stout. They bring in Trey Brown from Seattle, among some other names that we'll discuss. But at cornerback, I did ultimately say this group is slightly downgraded. The only unit on this defense that I can say projects as maybe being worse from what they had last year. Although, as we'll see, not all hope is lost there. They've got some youth in this group that could step up. But then at safety, they say goodbye to Talanoa Hufanga. Really couldn't stay healthy for them. And, again, like by name, is it a big addition for Denver? They're hoping so. But for the Niners, someone that played 29% of their snaps last year, and frankly, they didn't get the best version of Hufanga when he was out there. Really not a huge loss for the Niners compared to last year's team. And then they make some just, footnote additions, basically. Jason Pinnock, who's started a lot of games for the Giants, but hasn't started them well. A 5th-round pick in Marcus Siegel out of Kansas State, and Richie Grant, a 2nd-round bust from the Falcons. So I did say neutral at safety with some, names added to that group, and Hufanga just not being realistically that big a loss for this team. But let's get into it. This secondary, again, is going to show up, our final position group, as a wild card unit. They have potential for this to be an okay secondary. A lot of youth, though, that they need to step up. This group especially is where you're looking at some of those draft investments and hoping that John Lynch found some guys back here, because outside of a lot of these young players, they don't have the bodies to step up. Now, they do have one bona fide starter, and that is Deommodore Lenoir. He gets, frankly, a massive, $20 million a year contract. They love him, and he's a good player. I like him. I think he's incredibly versatile. He's played inside. He's played outside. He plays the run. He plays the ball when it's in the air. He can go man coverage. He can play zone coverage. Just super competitive dude that just checks a lot of boxes. Is he an elite shutdown corner? No, but he's like a low-end 1, really, really high-end 2. So he's a floor raiser for this group, and you feel really good about what you have in that piece right there. And then you should feel pretty good about Renardo Green as your CB2. Late 2nd-round pick last year, physical bump-and-run corner that just, he took some losses in his rookie season. He was more good than bad, but had some ups and downs. And just a guy that, having played so much man coverage at Florida State in a defense that does play a lot of zone coverage, I think a lot of the zone anticipation, having quick twitch route squeeze, passing off zones, that side of things I think can still develop for him. Arrow's absolutely pointing up. I think you plug him in as a CB2 and feel good about what you have there. But far from an established stud or anything like that. But, that duo is the best thing this secondary has to work with. And if Green can really take those steps forward, you can see with that as your cornerstone CB1, CB2 duo, how this can be, the baseline of a top 20 secondary with those two guys. But your question marks really start to stack up after that. Your CB3 is completely up in the air right now. Right now, their 3rd-round pick, Upton Stout, is poised to start in that slot position. We'll see if he can hold on to this job. And he's a fun player. I understand why they like him. Instinctive, tough, smart player, but radically undersized. 5'8" dude. 180 pounds. Look, this defense is going to live in nickel. They're going to ask him to be an extension of their linebacking group. That's a ton to ask of any 5'8", 180-pound player, let alone a guy as a rookie. So I'm legitimately worried about, teams isolating him in the run game, in the screen game. Not to mention the, jump in level of competition for this guy. He is the biggest of question marks. I do think it was a reach in the third round. It was a very shallow nickel class. They got desperate and viewed him probably as the best nickel available. You could debate if that was the case or not, but he was their guy there. But just because you take a guy in the third round because you're desperate for a nickel corner doesn't mean he's going to work or that he was worth that pick. And we've certainly seen that from John Lynch third round picks over the years. So I want to believe, man, he's a fun player, but the odds are stacked up against him. I will say that. Now, if he fails, you have some pivot options. They're not ideal, but they signed Trey Brown. Horrible year in Seattle last year. He ended up getting benched. He's had better tape in years past, but if he is what he was in Seattle last year, you don't want him out there. He was a liability for that Seahawks secondary, but there's a chance that even that is better than Upton Stout. So you're probably in that situation. I mean, Trey Brown could technically play the nickel. He's frisky, but Lenore probably is your emergency slot corner, and you're probably plug in Trey Brown outside, or maybe Dallas Flowers. He's probably the most interesting guy other than Upton Stout to me. Showed a lot of flashes in Indianapolis, but he went down with an early season injury last year, and they didn't bring him back. So he actually high-fives Shavarius Ward on the airport. These guys change teams. But there could be something there in Dallas Flowers as an outside corner, kind of in that length-based mold like a Renardo Green, and then you could put Lenore in the slot. So he's probably your most interesting backup plan there. I could see that working out as they sort through this group. And then Darrell Luter's been around here, hasn't really carved out much playing time. And then Fabian Moreau's like a break glass in case of emergency, like veteran Band-Aid. He's been the same guy since he's been in the league. Not the best like anticipation or technique, but just off of his kind of length and traits alone, he's like an up and down spot starter as an outside guy. So, they can have some options there, but it's nothing you're really excited about for the CB3 spot. Probably in all likelihood a position that you're going to get to next offseason and want to address, unless Upton Stout really surprises. But then unfortunately you have some major questions at safety. You have Jair Brown. He's not so much a question as he is just a adequate, unexciting, high-floor player. He was better than I expected last year. He didn't have like coverage busts or anything like that, but he's just not an impact player. Not a lot of speed. He's got some instincts, but I just see him as a guy that you can probably always get better at. But as a floor player, as one of your starting safeties, okay. But the number 2 safety spot next to that is further from ideal because of the injury to Malik Mustafa. He tears his ACL in the last game of the season, so he's not going to be ready to start the year. And then you're talking about, all right, here we go again with another one of these recovery stories. When does he get back out there? How healthy is he? How well does he recover from the ACL? And then can he stay out there? That is his second ACL injury. He had one in college too. So major health question on Mustafa. But if he does get back to speed, you actually are very excited about him getting back out there, because I loved Malik Mustafa. He was actually tied for me with Tyke Smith for my number 1 safety in that 2024 draft class. And he ends up starting last year. And I'll say this, there were some victory lap moments for me with that draft take. It wasn't all perfect. He ended up getting trucked by Patrick Mahomes for a touchdown. He got kind of posterized there. That's not emblematic of his tape and his style of play and his capabilities. This is a heavy hitter that's the only time I've seen him get the short end of the stick in a tackling engagement. it is what it is. But he loves to hit and can deliver the blow. He gets off blocks. He's a factor around the line of scrimmage. He has speed and range on the back end, and he's got some instincts and coverage. Like, there's a lot to like in Mustafa for him to be every bit that Talanoa Hufanga was for this team, if not a little bit more, like a more athletic version of Talanoa Hufanga. It's just that ACL injury was a tough blow. And in the meantime, you're talking about Jason Pinnock, who Giants fans are very excited to say goodbye to. A cornerback conversion project that just hasn't really figured it out on the back end as a safety. He just doesn't have the triggering ability, doesn't seem to really diagnose things on the back end. He's in a cornerback's body. He's not much of a run defending presence. So sure, as a Band-Aid until hopefully Mustafa gets healthy for 4 weeks, can you live with Jason Pinnock? Yeah, that would probably be just fine. But if Mustafa can't go, you're in trouble. Now, they do have a rookie in Marquise Siegel, who played a slot role for Kansas State. I actually think Marquise Siegel in more of a competition for the Upton Stout role would be more interesting to me. That's the tape I really liked from him. He's got speed and man-to-man coverage ability. In terms of breaking down zone coverage on the back end, he's a complete project, so eventually maybe things can come along for him. Love him as a special teamer out the gate. I think it was a good pick, but to expect much from him in the safety room, I would definitely say pump the brakes. As a slot corner, if they were to entertain him there, if Stout struggled, I would be more intrigued. Kind of Richie Grant as well, as a slot player, maybe there's something there. He just could not cover on the back end, and as a physical presence, he really struggles in that regard. He just is undersized, especially for a safety. More average size for a slot player. So, we'll see how they want to use those two guys. Siran Neal as well in Buffalo has been, he's mostly here as a special team player, but he's been used in kind of that big nickel safety role as well. So really all their backup safeties, other than, Jason Pinnock is technically a backup filling in for Mustafa for now. They're all more slot type of players. Not that they can't play safety, but they just don't have great players in that safety group, like straight up. And Mustafa's the only guy you're hoping can get to that level. So pretty easy to see why this secondary has question marks, why they can't rank out that high, even if you like how your CB2 and CB1 is positioning itself. It's a good starting point for sure, but most teams have a CB1, CB2 combination at the level of Lenoir and Green, and this unit has a lot more questions beyond that. So they rank 25th to 29th for the secondary, and even the run support is getting brought into question here because Mustafa's probably their best run defender. He's got injury concerns, and Upton Stout in the slot would be a concern for me. So they rank towards the bottom of the league there as well in that third tier, which ranks 21st to 23rd for DB run support. But with that, we can now wrap up this defense. So it's not a bad defense despite all the question marks, but it is a polarizing one. So I have them ranking 14th for the overall defense. I think that's a good starting point for a Robert Saleh defense that has Nick Bosa and Fred Warner on it, but a lot of young pieces, obviously, that are going to determine if this is an average defense or a very good defense, obviously. They've got decent balance. The pass defense actually gets a B grade, but ranks 18th, whereas the run defense, where there's less good run defenses in the league than there are pass defenses, the run defense actually is a B minus grade, yet they came out 13th for run defense. Though, I will say that came out surprisingly high by the math. The linebackers and Robert Saleh are doing a lot of heavy lifting there because the D-line run defense does have a lot of question marks. Really leaning on like Alfred Collins to step up, which he's capable of. And even the getting contributions from the defensive backs is shaky as well. But I think it's safe to say, like, just work to do with this defense. And you're hoping Robert Saleh, as the main addition there, is going to get things to land on the right side of the ball for this defense. But before we start to tie all of this together, we do have to talk about the 49ers' last side of the ball, in the special teams. I know Niners fans, you were hoping I was just going to skip this because this was a horrible, horrible special teams last year, highlighted by Jake Moody once again, proving why you shouldn't draft kickers high. He was supposed to be the exception. No, he's missed 16 kicks over the last 2 years. That's basically one every other week. So he was the 31st overall graded kicker with our kind of combined 2-year average that we use off of the PFF grades. I think it was Dustin Hopkins for the Browns was the only one worse. But that's a huge problem. And then even Thomas Morstead came out 23rd there. So your specialists are not great. And then even your returners are the only one that you really have nothing to hang your hat on, either kick return or punt return, as I went through all of these throughout the league. I mean, Isaac Guerrero theoretically should be a pretty good kick returner, but wasn't in his first year. And then Jacob Cowing was not a good punt returner. He muffed 2 punts and wasn't anything special in that phase either. And then they've got a bunch of other guys they're listing as returners. So your specialists don't look great. Somehow they came out as the 10th ranked PFF team grade for special teams. So PFF at least saw something good in terms of their ability to cover kicks and stuff. And theoretically, this is a tough culture that hopefully can get things back on track. But they were 31st with the DVOA team special teams grade there. So they come out as our 28th ranked special teams, and this was a bit of an issue for this team last year, if not a full-on issue, that they got some stuff to clean up here as well. But as we can now really summarize this Niners team before we take a look at their schedule and some of the win total expectations for this squad, I mean, the ranking is, I don't want to say irrelevant. I don't want to diminish the power rankings or anything like that. But this team especially, it's like the 9th overall power ranking is such a placeholder spot for this team. As we broke it down and as we look at their list of wild cards for this team, the different variables on this team that could go either way and decide how good this team is going to be, it's almost impossible to project this team and rank this team, from the weapons with the pass catchers and all of the different questions with both, injury questions and some young player questions. With the running back room itself tied to that with Christian McCaffrey, that group itself has young RBs that could also get better. The offensive line with Trent Williams and his age being a big wild card surrounding the idea that that's a pretty good unit. If Trent Williams isn't Trent Williams, it's a very mediocre offensive line. Then you go to the defense. The D-line had obvious question marks. At linebacker, you're still in pretty good shape, but D. Winters is a huge question mark as a young player with a starting opportunity that needs to step up this year. The secondary, full of young players and question marks, along with an added injury question mark as well with Malik Mustafa. It is really, outside of coach and quarterback, every pocket of this team has a lot of work to do, a lot of recovering to do, and a lot of proving out to do. And when you peel all of that back, it's hard to find definitive strengths on the Niners. There's a lot of stuff on paper that we know can be strengths if a lot of these guys can get healthy. But I do think linebacker with Fred Warner alone, that does make that unit a relative strength compared to the league, even if D. Winters is below average. And then offensive coaching. We know Kyle Shanahan is elite in that category. But then on the flip side of things, when you talk about the true definitive weaknesses on this team, I think the secondary, unless some of these guys, do trend in the right direction, is a weakness. That's the one true position unit that I can say that. Other than that, it's special teams. Not to diminish that, but it's not a part of the core assessment of the roster necessarily. So that's where this Niners team is at, which means as we look at their schedule, you would think, well, it's very tough to have a definitive opinion on their over-under and their Super Bowl odds and all of that. Actually, when I really reflect on this team and look at this schedule, I actually kind of like their over, even with all those question marks, because this team's schedule is kind of a joke. It's one of the easier schedules we've looked at for any team in this entire series, because the NFC West already plays their own division, which is up in the air, especially if Matthew Stafford's going to be injured. You know, we have to do the Rams deep dive still. That's a whole nother conversation. But the NFC West has question marks. But not even that that's a poor division. It's that they drew the NFC South and the AFC South. Probably the two worst divisions in football, other than maybe the AFC East. And then the Niners also get the fourth place schedule out of that because of how last season went. So considering the uniqueness that the Niners games in SoFi Stadium are, you know, half home games for them. It's a neutral site game, if nothing else. I have them as a pick'em game at the Rams. I only have them as underdogs in 2 games with this schedule. They just don't have like those juggernauts on the schedule. For example, of our remaining 8 teams left in this deep dive series, they only play 2 of those teams, you know, twice against the Rams, of course, but they just didn't draw those powerhouse opponents. So they don't need, frankly, all of those wild card factors to go in their favor. They just need several of them too. And I think this team very much can get through this schedule. And especially out the gate at Seattle, as they're putting things together with a very new look offense, at New Orleans week 2, and then Arizona and Jacksonville at home week 4, another young team. If you're talking about Brandon Ayuk needing 5 or 6 weeks, like, can he target maybe that week 5 game against the Rams as a return for him? Like, that sets up really nice. So this schedule is very favorable. The math on the Niners, with how I calculate it, actually has them at 11.2 wins, making this team a very serious bounce back candidate that might even have some value there. Now, Vegas sees the same thing. Their over-under is the highest we've seen in this series so far at 10.5. Their Super Bowl odds are top 7, 19-1. I don't think that's crazy knowing the upside of this team if they do hit all these green lights, or most of them. And they are actually first in division odds, even ahead of the Rams, who I have not ranked yet. Maybe they know something about Matthew Stafford that I'm not necessarily projecting here, but plus 155, almost even odds there for them to win this division. So Vegas isn't backing down, and the bettors do typically like this Niners team. So I do think, at least by the Vegas odds, my 9th ranking on this team is justified, if not too low. I know a lot of people were surprised with the Niners coming inside the top 10 here, but it's, again, that ranking is placeholder until we get answers on some of these health questions and until we see what so many of the young players that this team is actually leaning on look like. It is the definitive wild card team in the NFL that I am not prepared to make any definitive statements about. I do know one thing. The upside of this team is scary. This is still a roster that theoretically has a bunch of guys that are the best or top 3 at their position. And if some of the other fillers raise the floor a little bit and fall in as quality players, this can absolutely still be a part of the Niners Super Bowl window with this core. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's deep dive. Let me know what you thought of the breakdown on this Niners team. Who do you think comes in with the number 8 ranking? Should have that video very soon, within the next couple of days. Please do hit that like button on the way out. I hope you did enjoy. And until that next deep dive, cheers.